all love Splunk here. It's the best
Yeah,
thing ever. You know,
yeah.
so I've got the tattoo. Oh, awesome. Well, I'm going to let you do your thing then, and I'll go on mute if that's okay, Mohammed.
All right, sure. Yep,
Excellent, sir.
yep. Well, thank you, everybody. Too bad I can't see you because I have the camera muted here. But my name is Mohammed Hassan. Nickname is Mo. I've been with Splunk for about almost 4 years now. I was a former customer. I managed Splunk as part of security team for 5 years. I've actually used Splunk since version 2. So I've been around Splunk for a while. I love the product when I was a user, and I love it more when I'm an employee. So it's an exciting company, actually. I wish I can describe to you how happy I am working for this company. And if anybody get a chance to work for Splunk, by all means, jump on it. All right, let's just jump on the topic here. A few years back, I've learned about Docker, and as everybody else who's want to learn Splunk or mess with Splunk, they normally go the VM route and just create a bunch of VMs. And as you know, within few VMs on your laptop, 3, 4 at the most, then your laptop start kind of slowing down and maybe crash. Docker came to the rescue, and this product was developed about 3 years ago. Initially, it was 20 lines script and grew to be 6,000 plus. That's 6,000, 6K, for those who haven't heard, of bash script. Obviously, it runs perfectly in Linux. It also runs on Mac OS, and most of my development really in Mac OS at this point. It used to be all Linux. It runs in Windows 10 if you enable WSL, which is Windows, the Ubuntu shell session, bash session for Windows. So we'll cover that in details. But so my promise to you here is if you get it to run in your maybe Mac for 16 with 16 gig, you'll be able to bring up a single site cluster or maybe multi-site cluster, depending on your hardware resources, in 20 minutes or less. And it's really the easy button, literally. Um, Here's a little bit about me. I've been in IT for 23 years, former C guy, former Splunk guy, architect, incident response, and a bunch of other things. So nothing interesting here. As I said earlier, the problem I was trying to solve is just I want to test the environment on my laptop, and I don't want to just buy old hardware and just have a bunch of VMs that I could never really script them the way I wanted. Docker was very easy to script, low resources impact on the laptop, just perfect tool for it. Other use cases, those who have dedicated hardware in their companies with like server grade boxes, and they have labs, they maybe want to do classes. So you can use this tool for it. Again, the emphasis here really is on ease of use. Here's a diagram showing 3 full multi-site clusters, fully functioning, 100% operational. You can just take this and drop it in production, send data to it, and it would work. Literally, it would work. The 6,000 lines of code is all around troubleshooting, debugging, and catching error conditions and handling load issues. So half of the code is spent on making this a repeatable process, not just one-time deal. One time it works, next time it doesn't. So a lot of error catching routines, if you will. It's posted in GitHub, and the link was actually right there in the front. Or you can just Google Splunk in a box, and you see a bunch of articles and people worked on it. I think I'm ahead of myself here. I'm not catching the slides, but some of the use cases, as I mentioned earlier, this can be set for a classroom. It doesn't have to be. You don't need to use this product for building clusters, but you can use it for simple. Just hey, I want to create 20 independent Splunk instances, and just go click, 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 done. You have your own Splunk instances with everybody have their own IP and own password and own login screen. Again, using Docker as a backend makes it very, very efficient and with very low resource boxes. I have a little tiny box that when I show you my lab environment when I did this thing, $1,000 machine, and I was able to crank up to 50 Splunk containers, independent containers, if you will. It's an awesome number. You cannot replicate that with any VM technology, VMware or SBox or anything like that. The other use cases, if you want to learn clustering, the script will have options to either build a complete cluster, single site or multi-site, or you can do it manually if you want. Say, I want SHCC only and IDXC only, and I want to learn how to connect the dots. Or you can say, no, I want to build 10 containers, 20 containers, and I want to learn how to connect the dots. So it's a lot of it geared toward learning. There are some work around integrating and testing with MySQL and Hadoop, and again, just a lab environment. There's another container I have out there called DFS container. I'll share the link with you guys if you're interested in learning how to connect Hadoop, Kafka, or MySQL into Splunk. So it's just totally separate project. Other use cases, if you want to test apps, we all know I can download an app in my laptop. It works when you go to distributed environment. It's really not as easy sometimes. So you need to know how to handle it. So I'm giving you the option of having a lab environment in your fingertips instantly. There is another section for demos, and that's really not operational. It used to be operational. We took it offline. It was mostly for internal users, Splunk employees. But basically, the function was a ITSI demo, ES demo, whatever, all those big demos. A Splunk employee can actually bring that demo using the script to their laptops, and they have functioning working with event-gen data. So I have seen some people using the script to obtain their certification, architecture certification. So that's one thing. Do we need to talk about Docker? Because I don't really want to make this about Docker. Can you tell me? Yeah, or people are familiar with Docker.
Oh, that's fine. All familiar with Docker.
Okay. All right. So let's just skip the stuff about Docker. And just one highlight for those who are not familiar with Docker is the really key difference between Docker and regular VMs is the lack of the hypervisor engine. Therefore, you can squeeze a lot from your host than you can with the VM environment. When we reached the performance guys inside Splunk, and they were telling me that running Splunk in a Docker container is almost like a near bare metal performance. So Docker adds very little overhead to Splunk, if you will. Let's skip the Docker stuff. Features. Why why do we have 6,000 lines here? Why it's not just like 10,000 lines, or I'm sorry, 100 lines? Well, I just want to discuss that because that's something may not be clear for those who are using Splunk. Unless you start using Splunk day in, day out, you'll see it. But again, I did a lot of extensive error checking. I do adaptive load control. So one of the things that happens in a laptop scenario, not so much of standalone server, is Splunk is Docker is very efficient. It start cranking up containers quickly, and if you build in a cluster, you really need to slow down and make sure certain instances start after the other ones. So for example, I must have a cluster master running and fully operational before I spawn the other ones. Otherwise, I cannot call cluster master or license master. So that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of error checking. It checks your CPU and how many CPUs you have, and based on that, it will actually throttle the execution. If you ever get in a scenario where you start running a bunch of application and the script is running in the background, all of a sudden your CPU and load average increases, the script will detect that and will throttle execution until the load average drops down. That is huge feature, by the way. Again, repeatable is where most of the work really went. If your guys mess with Docker and Splunk, you know a lot of recommendation. It goes, well, start the first instance with port 8000, and next one 8001, 8002, and sequentially, so you avoid port collisions. I went a different route. I kind of have my own orchestration, if you will, outside Kubernetes. So I do actually create IP aliases, and I bind the containers to the aliases. So this way, all the containers will have native Splunk ports, own independent IPs. I solved the problem at layer 3 instead of layer 7 using a proxy or Kubernetes or something like that. So very small, very quick, efficient solution. The script actually will create those aliases for you, whether in a Mac or Linux. The script detect Mac OS, Linux, and is also AWS aware. So if you run this in AWS, it knows it's an AWS instance, and it will do the translation, the IP netting translation for you. Number 6 is a bunch of login. You can actually capture the stuff from the logs and just cut and paste and put in a flat file and just run the Docker commands, and it actually will run this, create the environment for you. This is fully configured, fully functioning, so you get the supporting elements like license master, cluster master, deployment, and all the good stuff. Performance optimization was a big key here. Again, a lot of work went around that. Every time I post a new upgrade or a new update to the software, your script will check GitHub and say, hey, a new version available, would you like to download? That kind of stuff, you know. So as I said, it runs in Windows with WSL, which is Ubuntu subsystem. Every Splunk instance will have its own login screen. Again, a good option to have if you have, it will tell you the password on the login screen. So if you're a lab environment, people don't have to ask, hey, what's my password? That's my password. Very few configuration required, and those are one-time deal. I've tried to do everything through the UI, but some of the things you may want to consider if you're running in Linux, in OS X, which is Apple computers, sorry, you may want to bind your interfaces to loopback. So the theory here is, by default, if I detect you're an OS X environment, I want you to bind your instances to a loopback. I don't want people to be able to hit the laptop from outside, because obviously I'm assuming you don't have resources for it. But if you're running in a Linux box, I'm assuming you have more resources, more like a maybe low-end server, and then I would ask you to bind your interface, your IP aliases to actually existing interface, in this case in EN01 or 01. And again, those are the defaults. There are a bunch of packages that I install, especially in OS X, GNU stuff. If anybody done any development in a BSD-like environment, which OS X is, you see a lot of commands don't really work the same as Linux, especially grep. So one of the things I heavily depend on is ggrep, or GNU grep. So it's a dependency that the script actually will download for you. The aliases, the starting space and ending space, you can control that, obviously. They did as a default image. This slide is old. The script will support images. I do have Splunk images deployed and posted in hub.docker.com from version 6.3 up to 6.2.1, if I'm not mistaken. So you can actually mix and match images. If you can just build a cluster with maybe version 6, and then, hey, I want this to upgrade. How does the upgrade work? So this is an option. Then there's a bunch of defaults, like what's a standard indexing, replication factor, and search factor. Those are really defaults. You can actually modify them. In a case of multi-site cluster, I have 3 default names: STL for St. Louis and London and Hong Kong. You can change that if you wanted to. Those are the naming conventions. You want to stick with that. Early days of the script, I gave the user the ability to change the default names. But then later on, I discovered that caused a lot of problems. So now I'm fixing the names. All the indexes will have an IDX name, IDX01, IDX02, and if it's a site-related IDX, well, let's say maybe like London_IDX. So the reason those are fixed is this is how I identify the functionality of each box. There isn't a way through APIs that can query a box or query a Splunk instance and tell me, hey, are you a deployer? Are you a search head? That there's nothing inside that I can query. Well, there are files you can look at, and it's not as easy. So I stuck with the naming convention as a way to identify the functionality of the box. So if you notice, this is a slide because I called DMC, now it's called actually MC for Master Console. A bunch of notes. If you run this in Mac OS, make sure when you install Docker, you go to the configuration of the Docker engine and just give it all the memory available and all the CPU available. By default, I think Docker comes with assign 2 CPUs and maybe 2 gigs of memory or something. Just make sure you assign all the available memory, all the available CPU to it. And just, you're not going to use that unless you need it. So just because you said use all the memory doesn't mean Docker is going to just hog all the memory and nothing available for the OS, but that's really not the case. If you don't do that, you cannot have multiple instances of Splunk. I mean, after 3 or 4 instances, your laptop will crash or start having problems. So just make sure, this is very critical. It took me 3 days to figure this bug out, by the way. As simple as it is, it just took a while to figure it out.
So Mohammed, Nick here.
Yes, yeah.
We also suggest with the swap as well, maximizing it.
Just a second, give me a second.
Yeah.
Just a second. Sorry, were you asking me about the swap?
Yeah. So I increased my memory. My default was 2 gigs. So I'm glad you're sharing these tips. So I just whacked it up. Well, what about swap? My default's 1 gig.
Yeah, you don't have to really change that. I would leave it alone unless you have problems. But the CPU and the memory is the key one. So.
Thanks. Anyone else?
So one of the differences between when Mac OS and Linux, in Docker is in Linux native application, as all of you might know, and then it comes to the OS, Mac OS world. There's a single virtual layer, and all the containers inside of that adds slightly to performance. So you'll see better performance in the Linux environment than Mac OS or OS X. That also have a side effect. People ask questions all the time. Well, I have my containers. How do I see the directories? You can export them and do NFS. So if you're running a Linux environment, it's easy. If you're running in a Mac OS, because of that single virtual layer, it gets a little tricky. So, but again, we don't really have to mess with that. For me, the script intention is to just avoid touching the CLI and the command line and just have run everything through the UI and then just focus on learning Splunk. Again, as I said earlier, if you're running in a Mac OS, the binding, the IP alias binding will be the loopback, so you can't reach it from outside. If you're running in Linux, it will be the routable space, so it can be reached, and that's what you want to use for a lab environment. Do not run Splunk D before you run the script. It will detect that. It will complain. It will ask you to kill it. It will actually, you can kill it from the UI if it's in the standard path /opt/Splunk/, but if it's not, and if you have a special path, then you will not be able to kill it. So just make sure there's no Splunk D running. Make sure there are no other containers running. The script does not like to have any other containers in an environment. And the reason, because I will hog the box. I'm going to take the whole box for other things. And if you have containers, especially Splunk containers, that's not generated by the script, they're not really binded to an interface like I would do it. And therefore, there will be some issues. So best practice is to delete them. You probably can run with them, but the script will complain. I'll tell you, hey, I see one of those weird names that the Docker assigns to containers. I tell you, this is not built by the script. Delete it. So just make sure you delete all the containers ahead of time. Don't run Splunk D, and just have the script do everything for you. Last item. You can tell you how old the slide is. It's boot to Docker. That stuff doesn't really apply anymore, so we can just ignore that. Questions so far?
Yeah, I'm just guessing that you mentioned earlier on if people would be interested about the connecting to Hadoop. So that would be a yes.
Not directly with Splunk in a box. There's a better container out there, and I'll share that link with you guys. It's actually under my GitHub, and it's really made from scratch. It has Splunk installed, Hadoop installed, Kafka installed, MySQL installed. They all have data populated, and And you can, when you run the container, this is a separate product actually. When you run the container, you can tell, hey, run it all ready to go, and I just want to configure Splunk, and I want to learn how to configure Splunk with Hadoop, for example. You know.
Brilliant. If you'd be kind enough to drop me a bit of a note, I'll make sure I give it to everybody.
Sure.
In the group, the wider group. There's a question coming in as well. You might need to come over. It's a bit of background noise. Yeah.
So my end. My end.
Yeah. No. Our end.
Oh, there's no background. I don't hear any background noise on your end.
My question is that Hunk Splunk Hadoop for analytics, or is that Data Fabric search?
That's the old stuff. Splunk Hadoop Analytics, yes. Old Hunk stuff, yeah. Yeah, Data Fabric Analytics is not there yet, even though I called my container DFS, but this is the early days of DFS actually. So no, this is the good existing Hadoop stuff. The DFS that you're referring to, the new product that we're coming out with, it's not really, we talk about it, but it's not out there yet, so. Okay, so here's how I tested this thing, again, about 3 years ago, and you can just do it simple laptop. If you want to do classroom settings, I've actually, if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, I invested $1,000 in this Intel box, and then another $300 on a nice router, and just bring those two together, come to the classroom, and voila, I have my Splunk lab. And I mean, it's unbelievable. It sounds like this is not real, but it is real. I've done this actually with my user groups here locally, and I mean, for 10, 15 people, maybe 20 people, native, nothing, no data, not massive data loading. This works just fine, really. You might run into trouble when you start sending a bunch of data to it. So again, for lab environment, that we're not doing load testing, we're just doing other things. So, all right, some screenshots, and those kind of slightly old screenshots. I'm gonna actually go to the demo. Hopefully it work with me. So we'll just ignore those screenshots. And the reason I did those because I didn't know if I'm gonna have a time when I did the .conf presentation. So I just showed people stuff just in case I run out of time. But one of the things actually that you notice in the top, it will tell you the Splunk version, it'll tell you the Docker version, how much memory you have, how much free stuff you have, the image, default image, the log level. You can control the log level. Default is log level 3. If you, the higher the number, the more debugging stuff. So if you go log level 5, you will not even be able to use the UI because it's a bunch of debug data coming at you. So 3 is good, and you can just go from 1 to 7, I think, or 1 to 6. So option 1, again, we'll show you this in a second here, a demo, but this is if you want to create generic containers, no clustering. You want to manage images, if you will. Option 2 is something I want to do with Lunch and Learn. So I say, hey, create 7 containers and install those particular apps on them. There's specific apps. And again, I want to give the instructor an ability to push an app instantly in the entire classroom. Number 3 is the most popular item, which is creating the clusters. And we'll show you the details on that in a second here. Demos is, again, I said internal use. And then the third party, which is option 5. I think I'm going to take this off because I have the other external container that I was referring to earlier. And then a bunch of other things, managed system. Again, my intention here is to for those who are non-Docker users or those who are not familiar with Docker, is actually to not to learn Docker and just focus on getting the value of Docker. So like purging the environment, deleting. So one of the things, for example, if you're new to Docker, when you start creating containers, you start noticing that your disk space is disappearing, That's one of the things, like when you delete a container through the script, it actually will delete it completely. So that kind of stuff that will get you as a new person coming to Docker. All right, so let's skip through that quickly. As I said earlier, this is the first option, and you see manage images. You can actually show the image detail. You can change the image, default image function F as in Frank. So you can go there and say, hey, I want whatever available. So when you go to the option, it will go to GitHub, my repository, Docker Hub, and pull up all the published images, and you can choose which one you want. Once you change the default image, now all your builds will be using that new Splunk version. The yellow stuff is regular stuff that you can do from a CLI for Docker, create containers, list them, stop them, start and delete them, you know, so. And then the blue one, again, I barely use the blue one, but you can, for example, you have an option to reset all the password, you know, or change them. So this is an older slide because it's no longer change me. It's actually hello 1234 because we change our password requirement of the newer versions. Yeah, okay, so let's see. This is the cluster menu, and that hasn't changed much. So the blue section is all the automated builds, if you will. Again, an option 1 and 2, just independent index and cluster, independent search at cluster, and just, hey, I want to learn how to connect the dots. Or I can say option 3, I want to build single site cluster, and just let it run for 10 minutes, and it will build you 3 search head, 3 indexers with a replication factor of 2, actually. It says 3 here because all the slide, and search factor of 2, 1 cluster master, 1 deployer, 1 master console, 1 there's no 1 UF, 1 3 search heads, and 1 3 indexers. You can do the same thing with multi-site cluster. Option the yellow side, the yellow section is the same, similar, but now it's manual process. In number 8, for example, build manual multi-site cluster. It will ask you a lot of questions. The stuff that you actually normally do in the configuration files. So you need to know what you're doing before you touch that option. It will ask you about search affinity, replication factor, site replication factor, a bunch of other things. I'll show you that in a second here. One of the options in the script is to list the containers. So again, you can do the same thing in the CLI for Docker, show containers. But this one's cleaner presentation of what's happening. We'll show you the version number of Docker. I'm sorry, the version number of Splunk running that container, the internal IP and the external IP. In this case, this is running on AWS, so you see the external IP pointing to AWS instance. And as you can tell with naming convention, I call it site 1 and site 2, you know, DMC for master console. I'm sorry for you. It used to be master DMC, now it's MC. So the names can tell you what it is the function of the container. The sample run has really changed the way it looks, but I'll show you some stats. Again, over the years, I have enhanced the performance of the script, and Docker has gotten much better about performance. So what you see here is probably not accurate anymore. So a single Splunk instance still will take 20 seconds. That hasn't changed. But building a single site cluster on my MacBook Pro, 16 gig memory, nothing has changed. It used to take 18 minutes. Now it takes 10 minutes, literally. The same thing with 4-site cluster. If you go into multi-site clusters, I recommend you run it in the Linux box. 16 gigs of memory in a Mac OS is not really good. So I'm not aware of any way to upgrade the memory in Mac OS unless you're just gonna hack it. So quickly, some frequently asked questions. Can you run different Splunk versions? Yes, there can. Go ahead.
Was there any questions? No questions, Mo.
Sure, yeah. So common questions I get asked, yes, I built a bunch of containers out there for each version from 6.4.3, as I said earlier, to up to 7.2. Again, the intention to test upgrades. Do I need valid Splunk license? Yes, you do. The free stuff that you get, the 500 meg, the 10 gig, and the 50 gig license as a customer, none of them support clustering. So having said that, if you run the script with a free version, it will complain, but you can hit enter and continue, and it will continue to build. So just be aware of that the valid Splunk license is required. So you can reach out to your sales guy that can give you a temporary license. It doesn't have to be 10 gig, or it could be like 1 gig license for testing, you know. So another question people ask, how do I log into the container? because you want to have like a shell session in the container, play with it. By default, best practices with Docker builds is not to add any unnecessary daemons like SSHD. So that doesn't exist in the container. There is a little script that I have in my in my GitHub, and basically you can actually simulate logging into the container. You'll get a login session. Things they don't install in the containers like fconfig and vi, but you can do apt-get something. You can download those if you wanted to. The script called docker-ssh, and then just give it the container name, capital case, caps, with the container host names, the case, it's case sensitive. So can I run this in production? Number 4, yes, you can. You own. This is really meant for a lab environment, but it will work in production environment. Is this script supported by Splunk? The answer is no. It's my own effort, and I still need to figure out a way to kind of create a form or something where people can just support it and answer it. But it's just really my own work. We do, number 6, we do support the different Splunk Linux distribution. Linux is Linux, really. It runs in Windows WSL. It does not use Docker Swarm or Kubernetes. This, I practically built my own orchestration fine-tuned for Splunk. With Kubernetes, there's a lot of overhead that I really don't need, so I'm just focused on getting the job done and shielding the user from the complexity. So can you run the script inside a VM? Why would you want to do that? I've seen people asking that question. Oh, I have VM, I want to have Docker inside it. Yes, you can. It's not a good practice. Just be aware that you need to figure out how to do the netting on the VM side. So the VM itself, netting in and out, because you have to create multiple IPs inside the Docker container. You need to be able to map that to through a VM to the local host so doable, complicated. All right, some of the links. This guy's picture here, his name is Ant, from a partner. He actually did interesting project. He created a USB stick loaded with Splunk in a box. So imagine this thing. You can carry this USB stick in your hand and just go to any laptop, plug it in, it loads the OS, and it will load Splunk in a box, and you have a working cluster running. You're running one with a working Splunk cluster in your USB stick. Novel ID, I'm not sure how practical it is, but if you're testing something quickly, no load testing, I think it would work. So I thought it was worth mentioning here. The whole .conf presentation, along with this PDF version of this slideshow, is actually available on my GitHub, and YouTube. So those are the key takeaways. I think this is potentially a game changer for those who want to learn Splunk and just going to test things. I've actually had people inside Splunk use a script to obtain their certification, architecture certification. I have a developer one time. We have a group inside Splunk that do custom apps for the users, for the customers, and she wrote something and it worked in her laptop, but when they deployed on the customer side, it didn't work. So she wanted to have a working cluster environment, and within 10 minutes, she was able to crank up the cluster environment and figured, oh, this is how you. So it was an installation issue, but she needed an infrastructure for her to test that. So, and the last thing is, I want you guys to give me a feedback if you see anything. If you like the script to do stuff, there are things that I cannot do and things I probably will not do. For example, a lot of people ask me, well, can you put an event gen with it? That should be a function outside the script or a container outside the script, because this will create load, and all of a sudden I'm bragging about I can do 25 containers, but when I start pushing data to it, 25 containers might be too much, so just be aware of that. So light traffic, small traffic, fine, but heavy traffic against those containers, you need resources. 16 gigs and 32 gigs is not enough anymore. So if you have 64 gig machine, then fine, yeah, do load testing all the day long. That's not a problem. But that's a Docker thing more than it's the script thing.
Mohammed, quick question.
Yeah.
If we wanted to learn a bit more about event gen, who would the go-to person be in Splunk, given that Clint is left?
That GitHub site, and whatever documentation you have there, I don't know if if there's a docs, official docs on this thing. So
No, we
the
can grab
GitHub.
it anyway.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. Awesome.
So here's a run that I've just did earlier before we started. It took and if you look down here, it actually, I'm sorry, if you look up here, it took exactly 9 minutes and 21 seconds. And I broke the build by steps. First, I build the what I call them basic services, master console, license master deployment. Then I do create a generic host of like 3 indexers. And then I configure the CM for the indexers, and I configure the members, and then I double check my work and do the same thing for search head. And then eventually I'll tell you a status. A lot of work went around making this presentable in UI and progress bars and all that stuff. And if you guys done some bash scripting, this stuff is really hard to do in bash. But again, it's just a way to do stuff, make it easier. So let's start. There are a bunch of command line switches you can actually, and one of the things I really need to do is do a better job in documentation. But let's see, ignore that first bad scripter. So things you can do, the script, again, option S is when the script runs for the first time, it does package checking, dependency checking, create the IP aliases. And if you have that ready, if you know it's there, you can actually skip that by supplying the S option. If you want to start from scratch and you say you have some containers out there, you can say run the script with the -D option. It will delete everything upon start. So it comes handy. And then you can change the log levels. -T option is a good one. By default, the containers will pause while you build a Splunk container. It will pause 30 seconds before it goes to another one, just to give it plenty of time for services to come up and all the stuff. And this is one of the things that I've actually had to struggle with. How much time should I pause between container builds? With times, Docker got much better, and now with my same laptop, I actually give it 10 seconds pause time between containers, and that speeds up the build significantly. That's, remember, the slide earlier shows 18 minutes, for a single site cluster. Now it takes 10 minutes. This is partly why, because you can actually control the pause between containers. -A option, and says volume next to it. This is a gimmick. If you're running in a Mac OS, I use the built-in Siri function. The Mac OS laptop will actually announce the build progress for you. It'll tell you building single site cluster, building step 1, doing step 2. Gimmicky, but I found it useful. Because sometimes I'll be doing something, I build a run for 10, 15 minutes, especially if you're doing large builds, and it's good to have some feedback, what step of the build you're at. So then the last one is if you're going to change the log file name. So let's start. Well, before let me just show you something here. It's starting from the top. It's a detecting AWS EC2 instance. And so again, I said the script is aware of the environment, and it changes its behavior based on the environment. Then it will start checking for packages. In the Linux environment, not many package dependencies I need, but if you're running in a Mac OS, there are a lot more packages need to be installed. So just be aware of that. It'll check if it's there. If it's not, it'll download it for you. Then it will check for things like if you have another instance of the script running. This is not multi-user, it's a single user, so it does not like having another script running in another screen. You can, if you not, and the reason you don't want to do that, especially when you're building, because I use the host name sequence numbering, like 01, 02, 03, so they're both running on different screens. They might actually step on each other. So you might be running the script in one session to build a cluster, but the other session, if you went on that script, if you must have it, do it for like listing things and look at images. Don't do it to build stuff. So avoid 2 sessions doing the builds. It will check for if Docker daemon is running, the version of Docker. It will check for the free memory, and it will actually complain to you if you don't have all the memory available in Docker and the CPU. See this option here. So it will complain to you that if you don't have it, because this is a must have it. It'll also check for a Splunk image. You must have that. If you don't have it, it will download it for you. We'll also create something called the internal Docker network, if those are familiar with Docker, which is used to set up communication between container to container. I call it Splunk-net. I do check for Splunk license, and if they're not valid or expired, you'll see error message later on. I do check for, I call it non-Docker Splunk D, and if it's sitting in the standard path, it will give you the option to kill it, but if not, kill it manually. The last option, this is experimental, as really never took off, and then not the last option, one before the last. And then this one here, the IP alias is very critical. You need that those aliases created, because you have to bind interface to it. If for some reason those did not get created, nothing will work in the script. So
Mo,
yes, sir.
one question, just going back to the Splunk image, can we use the latest, or does it have an upper limit on the latest version?
You have to use the images I built, I posted. I do have a repository in a Docker hub called Splunk in a Box. So you kind of dependent on me for those images. I can share my Docker file and the way I build them with you if you wanted to. And I try to be as updated as possible, but I'm always like maybe 1 or 2 versions behind. So, I try to be, because people always tell me, hey, this version is out. How come I don't see an image for it? So, but if you want to venture out, I can share all the. I didn't publish the way I build images in my my GitHub. I assume the image is there, but if you're interested, I can give you a Docker file and other things I've done with it. So yeah, so you have to you have to wait for me to release a new one, or take my Docker file and just build your own, if you will. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You definitely want that Docker file. They're all like jumping up and down here.
Sure. It tells you the Splunk version, the script version. Again, if this is behind, it'll prompt you here, like, hey, there's a new version posted. It is critical that you understand, and I'm saying this because it's been recorded, by hitting enter, you're accepting Splunk software license. This option get prompted to you when you install Splunk instance individually, like independently. But since we are shielding you from that, just be aware that you're accepting Splunk license by using that container. Also, the script itself is licensed under Apache 2.0, so you can take it, kill it, steal it, send it, do anything, whatever Apache license allow you to do. So I have no problem. I just ask you to reference me. It's actually, my name is in the script, but it doesn't really matter. So my intention is to make it available for everybody and share the knowledge, if you will. So I'm a very open source kind of guy. So. All right, so it starts again. I'm going to give you simple things to do. I can just say go option 1, and I'll just create a single container, and default host name, how many containers you want, and should be done quickly. So this is the pause I was telling you about. It's set to 10 seconds. Why do I pause? Again, the container is already running. I just want to make sure that all the services and everything is up and running before I go any further. Now, in the case of single container, it's not really an issue. I can just move on. But in case if you're building a cluster, then it's critical to have Splunk D running and other things running. And in case of single container, also I do copy license file if you have them. And I do have my container, and it's actually sitting on this IP address 10.0.11, and let's verify that. But see, this is a huge difference versus just you doing it and learning how to 10, what was it? 11. Let's see. Oh, fantastic. Should not be the case. Oh yeah, I see you have a lot of containers running in the background here. Let me just list them. See why this is not the go list. Oh, sorry. This is actually running on Amazon. So the IP space that I've used is really not the right IP space. I can't use 10 here. So I have to use the Amazon IP space. So this is the existing cluster I just built while we're talking right before we started, but I want to see the one I just built at the end. And that should be, yep. So if you notice the naming convention here is different. It just says host 01 versus the other one's DC for data center 1. This is the actual IP address that need to be hit because this is actually a container inside Amazon. If the script detected that I'm running this inside Amazon, the password field is hidden. But if it's running on a 192 space or any local space, if you will, then you actually see the password. It is hello 1234. So just be aware of that. Did I type it right? Hello 1234. No, don't save it. And there you go. Here's just a simple container that it was built. Now let's look at the actual other containers that should be running here for the cluster. This is the cluster master. And let me just copy this while the other one is listing. I should have saved it. Yeah, save it. So cluster master, if I look at the clustering index, and it tells you all the things satisfied, the search factor satisfied, the location satisfied, and all stuff. So this is just to verify that you actually, it's a working condition cluster. Questions so far? Let me actually kill everything and just show you a sample run. I'm gonna make the timer 10 seconds and delete all the containers upon restart. Did all the checks, went through them quickly. We're not going to wait for this to finish. It's going to take probably 10 minutes maybe, but just want to show you a sample of what it looks like. So I go option 3, manage clusters.
Hi, Ron, just a quick question.
Yeah.
So basically, this will create a standard build of a Splunk instance, obviously. But can you get it to do install apps and things like that, or give you a specific default to make it look exactly what you want?
There's an option. And it's really not fully developed. It's the one that says number 2, lunch and learns, and with that, I can actually have a specific apps. It will actually sit there and install it. So my challenge here is packaging those apps in a way. If I can take the gzip file that app is and put it in GitHub, in my GitHub. So what I'm trying to do actually is have the script scan a directory locally. So if you have the gzip file, which is the app there, it will actually make that an option for you. Heck, you want to install that app. So you have to download the app, put it in this specific directory, and then it'll be an option for you in the menu. You're replicating the deployment server functionality actually here. So, and also if you notice option 2 here says tutorial set, I also use the tutorial set that we normally use with lunch and learns, just Apache logs and maybe some lookup table. So yes, again, I don't think it's fully developed yet. I need to kind of clean up this section, but my intention is to have a classroom ready like script, basically just have give you the option to push those apps, or if you want to do it the proper way, deployment server get created and you can just push things to the deployment server and all the images that you have or the containers are running, they will be calling home and just kind of do it the Splunk way, if you will. So.
Mohammed, I have a question. It's Paul Adams here. Just thinking now of a use case, you know, maybe you develop a demo for maybe ITSI or something like that. What you don't want to do is go to the client and show them a demo with no data, nothing, no historical time charts of anything. It's all just nothing's happened historically. So my question really is about the persistence of data. Be nice to run this setup a little while for some time to pass, for some things to happen in your event gen, and for some episodes or whatever, or if it's enterprise security, you know, for some notable events to happen. And then, you pack your laptop away, assuming it was running in your laptop, of course. You put your laptop away, you shut down your Docker, and then you go onto the client site. You want to be able to see that historical data. So it's a question about the persistence of the index data and of the configuration, how that all works.
Yeah. If you properly shut down the container, by the way, there's a whole section here, number 4, about demos, that unfortunately, so every demo that a Splunk employee conduct to a customer is actually going through what we call demo site, and they have event gen and everything. That's really nicely built demos. And at one point inside Splunk, we have those containerized, and I was able to pull those into the script. Again, not available for public. Maybe one day they will. But they shut this down, and I'm attempting to create this. But none of the stuff that I'm talking about is going to benefit you guys. But it's exactly what you're referring to: a fully developed, fully baked, with a nicely configured event gen to communicate the value of Splunk. To answer your question directly, if you shut down the instance with the script or through the CLI, you know what I mean, appropriately, like here, you will not lose your data. But if you abruptly just shut down your laptop, you may have corruption issue. So if you want to preserve that, to have persistence you're referring to, just put this the container to sleep by proper stopping. So, and that will keep everything. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah. One thing I need to highlight here, and this is like a status thing, and as gimmicky as it sounds, but it really makes a huge difference when you constantly building containers back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is a quick cheat sheet. I find myself in the past exiting the script, going to different screens, see what's going on, making sure the containers are running. You know, sometimes you run something and then the container dies afterwards. I have a quick instant feedback to how many running, how many paused, and how many stopped. That is actually a common problem for newer Docker Splunk users. They run something and the container hit a snag somewhere and it dies, and then all of a sudden it was working. They don't know it's dead. And I was like, oh, this thing's not working. Well, they forgot to check, you know, why this thing died. So just having a quick feedback to the status of your environment, it made a huge difference to me. And the other things, like, again, I learned over time, is the free space. That's one thing that always hurt me, like I run out of space. So I just decided just gonna give me a feedback instantly. What's the free space in my laptop? The load average, that is a big one too. Again, running a single container, 2 containers, it's not a problem. Running a ES demo or ITSI demo with a lot of event gens, the load average will shoot up very, very high, you know, so until it settles down eventually. So being aware of these 2 values, your container status and your load average and your disk space instantly, this is one of the little things that I actually added to the script to make life easier. I was going to go build the cluster for you quickly. So let's go to option 3, and we're not going to finish that. Hopefully I won't have any license issue. But I will show you this one, 8. Number 8 is by far the most complicated option that you can choose in this script. There's a lot of intelligence in the background, and it's saying build a manual multi-site cluster. And now it's going to ask you for a bunch of questions. What's the site replication factor? And there's defaults. You can actually accept the default, the origin, total. What's the site search factor and origin total? And then those who build clusters in the audience, I'm talking about. And I do have like 2 default site names, Hong Kong and London. The cluster label, and then now I'm in site 1, which is London. And okay, how many indexes I want? 3. How many search hit, And if you notice, see, this is a standard notion with scripting. When it's capital case, that's the default. Lowercase, that's not default. So if I hit enter at this point, it will take the capital case, which is Y, which is yes. Again, search hit for that site, search affinity for that site. Again, in this case, a default is no, I don't want search affinity. I want to disable the search affinity for this site. And so on and so forth. I'm going through the whole thing, So then it tells you, here's, I'm going to build a cluster for you. Again, this is, the most complicated option I'm giving you right now. And make sure the configuration is correct. I'm going to hit yes. This is default answer. And it will start building the multi-site cluster for me. Let's skip that. I'm going to kill that quickly here because it takes forever to build. And I'm going to start brand new, delete all the containers that's already there. And I will do on the easy option 3 here, and I will choose option number 3, which is build single site cluster in automated fashion. And that's what's going to get built for me. Replace your factor of 2, search factor of 1 cm, when deployment, So let's choose option 3 and let it run. Again, if you turn the voice on in the script and it's running in a Mac OS, it will start giving you feedback what it's doing. So that's how the script will look like while it's running. While this is happening, there's a log file on the side. You can do tmlsf, and it'll tell you which command it's executing and to build that stuff. And you'll see it, build a container, scopy stuff, stop things, build things. So there's a lot of details. If you turn on the logging, the UI might get a little garbled a little bit, but it'll give you more details what it's doing in the background if you're interested in knowing more details of what's happening. Again, a lot of time spent on the UI stuff, things like this. If you guys are familiar with bash scripting, it really doesn't lend itself very well for something like this. But I wanted you to give you a feedback as a user, the status of what's happening, how long it takes, And it was good for me to optimize certain portion of the code, like why building a cluster master takes longer than building a license master, for example, something like that, so.
Yeah, so Mo, is that where you used GraphViz?
No, this is all TTY, cup this and cup that. GraphViz was actually, if you look at my .conf presentation, it gets a little fancy, and maybe I can show it to you quickly here while we're doing this. Let's say Splunk in a box. So I don't know, can you hear the voice? You guys can hear the voice, can you? So in the .conf, I didn't have time to actually go through the build. So what I did, I recorded the actual build, and I run it at a faster 2x speed. And this screen here is where the GraphViz is. So, can you guys hear me? So GraphViz is something like this. See that on the left-hand side is where GraphViz is.
Okay.
Can you hear the audio from the YouTube?
No.
Okay, good. It's actually. So the GraphViz is just a way to visualize what the build is doing, and it's again, I call it gimmicky, but it communicates the message. Actually, this is exactly what's happening. And then one of the things I did demo here, I killed the cluster master, and I start seeing the impact. And without visualization, it's very hard to see how the cluster actually adjusts itself. You know, so how does it recover? How does it go from the fix-up state? So, and I do, as you, if you listen to the audio, it tells you what I'm doing, actually killing certain elements of the cluster and measuring the impact on the graph viz. So the graph viz is what this is used for. So let's just move quickly through. But eventually the cluster comes back to live, you know. So yeah, so that's what graph viz is for. Any questions so far?
Just checking. Any questions?
Do you guys see this something you can use?
Yeah, definitely.
I do have a dedicated followers, especially from Europe actually, and from partners, because this saves you from creating and paying for AWS, honestly. You know, so whether you're doing it on your laptop for your own testing, or you creating a official lab environment for your customers with very low end, you know, hardware, like, you know, old Dell box or something like that.
So Mo, when are you coming to the UK next?
When am I coming? I'll talk to my boss.
Who's your boss? Talk to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, send me an email. I'll send you his name. But
Yeah, done.
yeah, but seriously, do have dedicated followers out there. I've actually seen an article in Spanish, and I couldn't really understand what it's saying, so I did a translation on it. But apparently, some guy was just doing a review of the script, and he just mentioned Splunk in a box. So I don't have a good way of measuring the popularity. I think I do know I have thousands of images downloads out there. I know in the GitHub, I think it is the 4th largest popular Splunk project in GitHub. And there's like so many of them, like maybe like 50 or 60 of them. Evengine was actually one of the popular ones. So I think a top one, number one, I think. Evengine, Kafka, and then maybe my stuff comes. So again, I just want to create a tool that's useful, that's not gimmicky, something you can use, very easy to use, shield you from learning Docker. And you can actually play with Docker. One of the things I mentioned in my .conf talk is it's easy to build a single Splunk instance with Docker. One command line, done. Trying to make this repeatable, trying to make it consistent, especially when I'm clustering, it becomes very difficult very quickly. And hence the larger amount of code. And again, as I said, half of the, if not more than half of the work went around error checking and load and making sure things start the way they're supposed to start, and checking things after I do it. And so tons of error checking basically. So also it helps that I solved the problem at layer 3 for the port collision issue, just creating simple IP aliases instead of messing with reverse proxy or Kubernetes, you know. So I'm removing the load on the machine, so I'm freeing everything to the containers themselves. So those are little tune-up things that eventually added up and enables you to repeat this over and over and over in a very low profile hardware. So if you decide to venture out, one of the things that commonly happens, I see people doing, and like tell you, oh yeah, I ran this, it didn't work. Well, number one seems to be number one reason for things don't work right away is Xcode must be running in a Mac OS. You do not have any containers running. Permissions issue. The script does not need root, and actually it will complain and exit if you're running as root. So don't be tempted to make it root. So I added functionality to it will detect if you root. I'll say, nope, I'm not doing it. So I forced the issue. That's because people run it as root and not root, and then they have a lot of permissions issues and causing problems. Now it's always going to be forced to run under user ID. Some functionality in the script require sudo access. A common Linux trick or Unix trick is you can create sudo files, set your credential there, so it doesn't prompt you for that every single time you need higher elevated permission. Otherwise, you will be prompted to enter your laptop password in case of Mac OS. Yeah.
So Mo, I'm just looking at your your script. And I see you also say you must have bash. I mean, you're going to be annoyed when they go to Catalina and the default shell will be Z shell from Mac OS. Did you see that announcement?
I didn't see that. Yeah, that's going to be annoying.
Yeah. Okay.
I do actually download that. Yeah, that's going to be a problem. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. So what really should have happened from day one, and I made a mistake by not doing it. This should have been a Python script. Bash, it works, but it doesn't lend itself very well to large scale deployment like this, large scale development like this. So has it been, if it was a Python, I wouldn't have any problem with any platform, you know, be smooth. I can do, I was doing a lot of dumb tricks, if you ask me, just to get the stuff work because it's Bash, you know, global variables instead of local variables. And anybody who's done development knows when you start growing to 1,000 lines threshold, the code need to be cleaned and tight. Otherwise, it's very hard to read afterwards. So I try to make it as presentable as possible, as document as much as possible. Even sometimes I go back and like, how do I do this? And I'll start reverse engineering my work, you know. I imagine it'd be difficult for someone who just hasn't, you know, did not write this thing from scratch. How difficult would it be to just understand what I'm trying to do? But yeah, so maybe one day I'll convert this to Python. So all these problems will be dissolved and disappeared and just, you know, Python conversion and actually proper documentation is something I should actually pursue, but. Yep. So the thing was complete, and I got some stats to what's happening. So if you look at this side here, for example, it'll be interesting to see what step took the longest, and it's basically building the basic elements. This is what took generic 3 IDX host. That was like 1 minute and 36 seconds. You know, so. The actual configuration, like configuring search hit with a captain, that's like 4 seconds. So it's interesting, huh? There was I was a few years back, I was showing this to a PS manager, and he smiled and he told me that they used to have, a long time ago, they used to have competition among the PS guys, like who can build a cluster the fastest, you know, who can script it basically. So I also was talking to another PS manager one time, and I'm a sales engineer. I'm not like 100% hands-on like a PS person would be, a professional services. So I was telling him, how many clusters have you built in your career? He, I don't know, 100, 200. And I said, I built 1,000. And he laughed at me like, how can you build 1,000? You don't even do hands-on stuff. I was like, Splunk in a box, you know, so. I did build thousands of them over time. So, but for testing purpose, obviously. So, there's one story I like to tell people, just tell you that the use cases come about. I mean, I was at a customer site. We were doing ITSI demo. We have the specialist in there and the admin right before. We just brought a bunch of people in. They travel out of town, you know, and the admin right before the glass table exercise, they actually decided to delete ITSI from that server. So we're like, the concern was, do we have to reboot servers to do the installation? You know, that was the concern, because, and it's out of the question. You cannot reboot indexers in this particular customer site. This is large production environment. So I needed a way to verify that we can install ITSI with that installation. But the scenario was, this particular customer have clustered search heads with particular version and non-clustered indexers with a different version. So that scenario, I was able to emulate very quickly in my laptop and test particular file of ITSI installation, push the indexers, did not have to reboot, proved that we don't have to reboot this, and the whole thing continued. So within 15 minutes, I was able to verify a very complicated scenario that would have taken, you know, a day or so to test. So that kind of stuff will pop up. So again, you really have to be familiar with the script and just gonna know your way around clustering. So questions?
Just checking.
Checking. I'll take a sip of water.
Yeah. Are you doing anything in Ansible?
No, no Ansible, no Kubernetes, none of that stuff. It adds overhead, and I want to show you the website, the GitHub site. So if you go to GitHub, and I promised you earlier about the other container. So this is Splunk in a box work, and this is the data fabric container. I know I'm using the name that used for something else now for a new release product, but this is an internal name used for this particular product. And this container here, if you click, it's really more than a container. It's actually, if you click in Wiki, there is a tutorial, big tutorial from like A to Z, well-written tutorial by one of my colleagues, and I converted his stuff from the VM environment to a Docker environment and just kind of modified things. But the intention of the tutorial is, it's actually used for internal training too. How to teach Splunkers, how do I connect Hadoop, how do I connect relation database, how do I connect Apache NiFi. And it's about 5 gig container because a lot of things squeezed there. And I actually pushed the limit for container builds here because containers, Docker containers do not like to have multiple processes running in the same, just one process per container. That's the conventional wisdom. That's the proper way of building containers. In this case, I'm adding multiple processes, multiple services in one container. So there's a little tricks. There are a bunch of tricks that I have to do actually to make this happen. And again, a lot of screenshots and things need to do. So the container is posted, and that's how you run it. Just run this command. And you can say, I want to run Apache, yes or no, Kafka, yes or no, Zookeeper, yes or no. And but if you answer yes to all of them, it will actually run. This is again independent from what we do in Splunk in a box. Just you would have this separate container, and then the tutorial here will go through. That's how the screenshot will look like when you log into Splunk. The tutorial will go through how do you start Hadoop, how do you stop Hadoop, how do you start Yarn, stop Yarn, and then alternative commands for it. How do you log in to the container, in this particular case, SSH must run because it was actually used by Hadoop. So not many people know that. And then goes through configuration. How do I configure Splunk to connect to Hadoop, And those are the things that needs to happen before you do it. The same thing goes for Kafka, the same goes for Apache NiFi, the same goes for MySQL. With MySQL, we load sample data there so you can actually see it real time. So DB Connect version 3, I think. But that's for the data fabric container I call it. And this is the other one, the Splunk in a box. Why is it taking forever? If you look at Splunk in a box here, and basically when you all you have to do is to run this command one time and actually clone the project, and it will create a bunch of directories for you and inside the container, inside the your host. The language here is poor, I admit, and this was written 3 years ago when Docker was new. So, but it should have been cleaned up. But and I tried to avoid as many as I put little instructions as possible here because I want this to be hands off, if you will. There are some tips, like if you get this error message when you're running Ubuntu, there's a way to configure it. It can fix it through get grub, It gives you some little tips on how to do it in Windows 10 with WSL. Again, this was written about 3 years ago. Windows WSL has improved quite a bit, and I was really impressed with the bash quality under Windows 10. It's really native. None of that wine. I can remember the wine. Anybody remember wine?
Wine,
Anybody
yeah.
use that? Yeah. Or or VNC, all the stuff, it's all gone. It's just really as native as it can be. So it's gotten better with time. I was really impressed that 6,000 line script was able to run almost flawlessly under this bash under Windows. So some tips around Mac OS. Again, you must have Xcode running. Again, the script will actually will verify that for you and force you to. You cannot move without running Xcode. One of the things with the Mac OS, you must install brew package, which is, if you guys are not familiar with it, this is a must for any Mac OS. It gives you all the commands that you see in BSD like Mac OS. They're not POSIX, but they're not. What's the word I'm looking for? I forgot. It's not a POSIX thing. It's just it's not Linux compatible really. And if you install that brew package, everything becomes Linux-like or Unix-like. So yeah, simple configuration, or sometimes little no configuration. Your mileage may vary, how long it takes to install. If everything goes wrong, 10 minutes, especially in a Mac OS. And on the Linux side is very, very, very quickly. And the Mac OS is where the trouble is. Initially, I did all my development in Linux, but then I got so much pressure from my colleagues because Mac OS is a very dominant laptop inside Splunk. And a lot of people told me this will not take off inside Splunk unless you make it native to Mac OS. And then I pushed myself to it, and it was very painful, I tell you. It was really, really painful converting this from just standard Linux to Mac OS. So, but once I got it going, then from that point on, everything was developed in Mac OS and then just tested in the Linux side. So, questions?
Let's see. Questions?
So one of the things I plan to do, and I'm not sure how to do it exactly, is actually make a Splunk app and wrap this around it, embedded in the app. So once it becomes an app, if you will, with the script embedded, and this kind of somehow, instead of presenting the stuff through a CRT like, maybe through a web interface like, and just have a Splunk instance build other Splunk cluster, or maybe just have an Apache running, and then the Apache interacts with the script through a CLI somehow. And then I can actually utilize the graph viz and just kind of give them better visual. So there's tons of stuff that I want to do on it with this thing. I just don't have time basically, but the possibilities really endless. So, but at least the basic functionality is there. Just if you want to cluster quick, efficiently repeatable, it's doable. So
Mo, did you do this all in your own personal time?
Amazing.
yes, sir.
You're amazing.
Nobody paid me.
We're building a statue of you right now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
So we're building a statue of you in London. Come over and open it for us.
Well, this is recorded. I'm going to refrain from saying stupid stuff. Yeah, but normally I would give you a smart answer.
Another question.
Yeah.
Hello, Mo, it's Paul Adams
Yes,
again.
sir.
Just thinking of the use case of if you're going to use this platform maybe to develop some stuff. So if you're developing an app or something in Splunk, and you want to git control it and all that kind of stuff, I guess it's going to be locked inside the container, isn't it? The etc directory, your app. I don't know whether you encourage that folder, the etc folder, to be bound to the host OS folder location, or how you propose getting that stuff out. Yeah.
So are you asking how do I send things back and forth to containers? How do I like copy things, if you will?
Well, how would a user of this platform, someone who's using it to develop their app, they're developing dashboards and I don't know, summary index, knowledge objects. Yeah.
So you can still use things to UI, but remember I said earlier that let's see what's all my containers, for example, and one of them is, let's just pick up one here. well, there's something called host1. If you want to log into the container, there is a directory called scripts, and run this script docker ssh, which is really nothing but a remote, I'm going to show you the script, a remote execution command, which is a common trick inside Docker. So if you run this command, we'll give you a shell session inside the container. So put the container name, host01, and voila, I'm inside the container right now. This, wait a minute, no such container. Why? I spoke too soon. Or maybe I deleted it. Okay, so let's do Docker SSH and this copy another container, the master console maybe. There you go. I am inside the container right now. This is, I can do anything I want inside the container. I can install apps, install VI, whatever. So you have a command line access. And top of that, Docker natively has a copy command. So you can actually, just like scopy, from file system to file system or from host to host, you can do the same thing with the containers. And I do quite a bit of that actually inside when I build the script. So if you go to the log directory, so those are little tricks you can do while you're developing an app. Oh, let's get out of here.
I'm just thinking though, yes, you can access those files by SSHing in, but on your piece, on your host PC, you've got all these great development tools like a visual Git editor and I don't know, a JSON viewer and a
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, you don't want to have to copy stuff out of the container. You want to have almost like a share, so you can use your machine's tools on that stuff.
So if you're running in a Linux environment, that is very easy to do because you can actually mount those volumes from the containers to your local host directly, almost like NFS. So a simple copy to those directories will actually send it to the container. However, in the Mac OS, that's not the case because you have a single virtual layer, as I said earlier, and it gets complicated. So all the containers you see in the Mac OS, all under one VM, which is separate from the host OS. And I think they have their own tiny, I forgot what it's called, but it's a very optimized VM. So yeah, mounting volumes in a Linux install, easy. Mounting volumes in a Docker Mac OS is not as easy. You would have to either log in directly, install your stuff there, and do not delete that container. So you would.
No, this is where I'm surprised actually, because this is where Windows seems to come out really well. Because I mean, I develop on a Windows machine, which used to be kind of uncool, but I find that I'm able to share the etc folder entirely with the Windows host file system, and it seems to work. Yeah, so yeah.
I think
Windows is better than Mac OS.
They actually, surprisingly, you're right. Windows, they've done a lot of work in two areas with Docker and with the Linux Ubuntu guys. They spent Windows as a company about 2 years ago, my opinion, 2-3 years ago, they went heavily towards the open source and they make life easier. But I believe what you're saying, their virtualization is embedded, you know what I mean, inside the kernel, unlike what you see in a Mac OS. So yes, I believe you. Developing Docker under Windows probably be easier at this point. However, what I would suggest for you is just develop everything on the Linux platform, because mounting volumes will be very easy. Just like I said, you will be able to just CD to a directory, and that directory is actually inside one of your containers. As simple as this. So instead of copying.
Do you have to hack into your scripts very much to achieve that? I mean, do your scripts make that easy for you to do?
No. So the volume thing, I don't create volumes and for you to expose that outside. But if my script is running in the Linux environment, as I said earlier, creating volumes through a Docker CLI is easy.
Yeah, cool.
So it becomes very easy, and then you can mount all these volumes from all these. Initially, I did a lot of work like this actually when I was running on because one of the things I want to do, I would be able to move file back and forth into containers, and in the Linux world, easy. Mount the volumes, they're visible to me. I have like 100 directories for each container, all the subdirectories, copy back and forth. When I went to the BSD, Mac OS, it becomes very difficult because of the single virtual layer. So I was forced to use the copy command in Docker to move things back and forth.
Cool. Thank you, Mo.
Yep. The other trick that I've seen that people ask about persistence, one of the tricks that you can actually do, you can build a container of volumes. So that's, I think it's a convoluted approach, but it might work. So forget about my scripts, forget about, this is just Docker in general, Docker's, and you can have, let's say 5 containers of Docker, and you want to share volumes with them. You build a 6.1, and that 6.1 takes its volume from the 6 container. I'm sorry, the 5 ones take its volume from the 6.1. So think of it as like virtual NFS, if you will. Performance probably will suffer. I don't know if Docker has a good solution at this point as we speak commercially. I've heard of stuff, I've seen stuff, but this is a general problem. In general, that's why you don't see people deploying a massive database on the Docker environment. There are some commercial solutions out there trying to address that problem, but I haven't seen native solution yet as we speak. Okay.
Yeah. I think we. All good then. That's amazing. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I'm bowing in front of the camera right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That was just fantastic. Thank you so much for giving
Thank
us.
you, guys. Yep. And if I make it to London, I'll try to time it where with the one of the user groups, so I can get to see everybody. So.
Yeah, we'll roll the red carpet out for you. You know, don't worry about that.
Yeah. And if anyone you guys going to the conference in October? Yeah, reach out to me. Love to meet you. So.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. That's unbelievably awesome. So if you would be kind enough to drop me with a video and a couple of links or whatever, I'll get it out to the wider group, Mo.
Absolutely. We'll do that.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Amazing.
Thank you, guys.
Work you've
Thank
done.
you, guys.
Very impressive. Thanks for today's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great one.
Yeah.
Guys.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye now. Let's hang on. Should we take a group photograph quickly while we're all here?
Yeah.
Amazing. Right. How are we gonna do this? Who doesn't want to be in it? They can be the photographer. Oh man.